Greetings, friends and fellow travelers and life mastery wannabes. Welcome to Life Mastery TV, your source for inspiration, empowerment, and fulfillment. My name is David McLeod. I am your life mastery coach, and I'm your host for today's show. You know, joy is something we all love to have in our lives. Certainly I do, and I'm imagining that you do too. It's one of those empowering, enlivening energies that helps to keep us moving forward, no matter what else might be going on around us. But every once in a while, and maybe even quite often for some people, something comes along that seems literally to suck the joy out of everything. You ever had that happen? I know I certainly have. And life seems to fill us with a sense of doom and gloom. Well, today we're going to talk about what you can do when these joy-stealing dragons show up and take up all your space. My guest today is a neuroscience and mindset expert with a lot of experience in this very topic. After healing from an abusive marriage and navigating the diagnosis and eventual death of her 3-year-old daughter, she found her way to bounce back and reclaim her joy in life. Today, she helps successful women tame the dragons in their life and elevate their joy to new levels. She also has a quiz available at her website, joystealingdragons.com, where you can find out more about the dragon that might be causing you problems right now. And we'll talk about that again later, but right now I just want to say welcome to my good friend and my colleague, Linda Shively. Thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you, David. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, this is not your first time on this show. This is what I think your third time or something like that.
Who does math? Yeah, I think it's a second.
Now I do know that every time we get together, we have a good time, and
yes.
I'm sure that today is going to be no different. But I'd like to start by saying to you, Linda, I mean, I can't really imagine what it's like to lose a child. I imagine that it was quite a traumatic and maybe, well, more than difficult time for you. But I have no doubt that you probably found yourself experiencing complete loss of joy for quite some time. Would you be willing to share a little bit about that experience and maybe how you found your way back?
Yeah. So in December 2005, I had to make a really tough decision. I had to figure out how to get out of an abusive marriage with my only child, Jessica, who was 3 years old, had tremendous special needs. She required medical assistance for eating and even breathing. And to get out of that situation, because I felt like I was just walking on eggshells all the time, and I didn't want it. It wasn't good for me or for her. And she had this bright light, this incredible joy in her, and would zoom around in her power chair because she did have strength in her index finger to be able to drive, and would light up a room with her animated eyes. I cannot move my eyes and my eyebrows the way that she could. And I knew that we had to get out. So on a Tuesday afternoon, after she got home from preschool, I put her down for a nap, and I asked her nurse, you pack up all of the medical equipment, I'll get her clothes or toys, and as soon as she wakes up, we're going to escape. And we escaped, had a couple weeks, and exactly 2 weeks later, I held her in my arms as she took her last breath and died.
Oh my.
To say that I was devastated is an understatement. Basically, my life fell apart. Everything, I lost my marriage, I lost my daughter, my reason for being, everything gone in a heartbeat. And it took a while. I would say close to a decade to really get to a place where joy is a regular part of my life. Not to say that joy didn't exist, because joy and sadness can coexist, but to really get to the point, because I struggled with procrastination and overwhelm, and how do I even take action on anything that I want to do let alone even know what I want to do, because I felt, well, I'm not good enough to do things. How can I possibly start something new, help other people, when I couldn't even feel like I could help myself?
Right.
And over the time, with lots of coaching, lots of training, I have reinvented myself and reinvented my life. And now I'm able to help other people on their journeys to really identify what joy killers are in their lives and what to do about it, so that they can take the action they want to take and make the difference that they're meant to make in this world, both in their life and in their business.
Yeah. Well, that's quite an amazing story, and I can only guess how much pain that must have felt. I mean, how much pain you must have felt. I know that we all have our own experience of pain, but when I imagine losing any one of my children, I can just feel my heart just kind of crushing. It would just be very, very painful.
Yeah.
So I want to just honor you and bless you for the journey you've been through. I know how hard that was, and I see you now, and you always show up as someone who's very happy. That's been my experience of you. So you obviously have done a lot of deep work on this. So I just want to honor you and thank you for doing that, because I think what you have done for yourself is you've taken yourself through a very, very difficult journey that probably happens to a lot of people. Many people have that same kind of, well, maybe not exactly the same, but a similar kind of journey, a similar path. And so now you can help them to become reconnected to the joy that they once had, and maybe to remember the passing of someone in a way that only you look at the light and the blessing and the gift in it. So I'd like to ask you now, where did this idea of dragons come from? What are these joy-stealing dragons?
Well, these joy-stealing dragons are part of who we are, and they come into our lives in ways that really are detrimental and not really very helpful. And I identified 5, and I've even named them. And these are the names I came up with. I've had people say, what about this other name? I don't care. Call them what you want. These are the names I've came up with.
Yeah.
But the first one is second guessing Sally. And second guessing Sally is always unsure about a decision, either having difficulty, wants you to have trouble making a decision, or even if you've made a decision, she'll make you doubt it and rethink it and stress over it and not lose sleep, even if it was a totally confident, clear decision when you made it. The next one I've identified is No Good Nancy. And No Good Nancy wants you to believe that you were not born good enough. And no matter what you do, she'll say, you can't do that. You're not good enough. Or even if you succeed, you could have done it better. And then there's Perfect Paula, who wants everything to be just so before she'll take any action. And she wants you to have everything lined up, organized, exactly the way it needs to be before anything happens, which basically means nothing happens. And then there's Judging Jenny. And Judging Jenny always wants you to compare yourself to somebody else, whether it's to put them down so you feel better, or whether it's thinking that other people are judging you. And I like to say that social media is Judging Jenny's playground. Because, what do we see? We see the bright, shiny faces, everybody on vacation, eating amazing meals with wonderful people, and life isn't always that way. The 5th dragon I call Overwhelmed Ophelia. I know, you may say, what? There could have been another O name? Fine. But Overwhelmed Ophelia always wants you to have a tremendously long to-do list and a packed schedule, so that everything is that you say to yourself is, I'm so busy, as if it were a badge of honor.
Right.
And everything on the list might actually not be important. So these dragons come up in our lives, and if we don't address them and deal with them, forget it. Life just, nothing works.
Yeah. Well, all of these characters, this cast of characters that you have named, I notice they all have female names, and I assume that's because you're working with women mostly.
Right.
Which makes perfect sense to me.
And you can call them Judging Johnny.
Right.
You can call them,
Right. Well, which is what I did on my website. I changed some of the names, not all of them, but some of them, just to make it a little more gender neutral. But my point is, now I do a lot of work with people on the shadow side of things. And I mean, I think this is great coming up with names for these characters because we all experience them one way or another. We may not always see them as second guessing Sally. I might come up with a different name that doesn't have anything to do with second guessing, but it would still have the same energy. That idea that you can't make a decision, or if you make a decision, it's the wrong decision, or this or that or the other thing, because you've got this whole host of characters up here in your head, this all based on the ego mind, by the way, and they all are doing the same thing. And the one thing that they have in common is they believe that there is danger lurking everywhere, around every corner, that no matter what you do, you are in danger. So they're trying to keep you safe. They're trying to help you to avoid dangerous areas. Now, what kind of dangerous areas? Mostly, they're going to be dangerous areas that are related somehow to things that happened in your childhood, that when you tried such and such a thing, you may have got spanked or punished or something or other. But you learned somewhere along the way as a child that to engage in that particular behavior resulted in something painful. And as a result of that, what you end up doing is looking for ways to avoid the pain while still engaging in the behavior. And this is where our shadows come into play. And we all have shadows. But how they show up, we have these shadows. It's complicated. I don't want to get into too much depth here. But the idea is you learn to have a negative belief about yourself that shows up in a variety of different ways. And then you try to compensate for that negative belief by coming up with a different way of showing up in the world. And that compensatory behavior is a mask to cover over that part that you think is bad. That's really what this is all about. That's how I see it. And that's very much in alignment with what I teach and the work that I do with people. Mm-hmm. So when you talk to your so we've met the dragons now, we've met the 5 particular ones that you know about. When you're working with clients, what do you tell them about where these dragons come from, how they come into existence? What is it that you share with them?
Well, it's often similar to what you said. It typically comes up in their life at some place far before they actually consciously remember it. And they might consciously remember it, but usually if they have a conscious memory of something, it's a bigger deal, a bigger event. And there's often that, I like to say, a tiny grain of sand. Like we remember the boulders, we remember the big rocks, the really horrible things that happen. But sometimes there's just this little incident that happens in childhood, even as a baby, that we may not even realize. And having the unconscious mind just check in and know what that is and then be able to clear it can really allow people to release some of these negative patterns and beliefs so that they can move forward.
Right.
And often the voices that we have in our heads are not our own. They could come from our parents, our teachers, the bully at school, whatever. And understanding what voice we want to listen to and making sure that we have a choice in how we listen to those voices.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. I know when I first started doing my own deep process healing work, a lot of the voice that I heard the most often, I attributed to my mother. Mm-hmm. And now that I have done a lot of work on that and I've been able to heal the wounds associated with my mother, and I've gotten to a place where I was able to forgive her for all these so-called bad things that she did to me, when in fact, I made the choices myself. Many of my choices were my own choices, even though they were choices made when I was young and maybe too young even to know the impact of those choices. But nevertheless, they were still my choices. And that's something that most people don't want to take responsibility for. You know, everything about my life right now is the result of a series of choices that I made up until this point in time. And some of those choices worked for me, some of them not so much.
Exactly.
You know, but I remember going through a period of time where the only voice I heard in my head was my mother's voice. Now, it's interesting today, I still hear some of those messages in my voice, but it's not my mother anymore. Now it's me. I can recognize that it's my own voice. And that I find fascinating. So now I am, even though that voice of my mother really wasn't my mother's voice at all, it was me projecting my mother onto it's very complicated.
Oh yeah, of course.
But the idea was it was still my voice internally, but I pretended it was her voice, so I didn't have to take responsibility for it.
Yeah.
That's really what I think was happening.
Right.
And this happens to all of us.
Right. And that's something I say is it's important to choose your voices.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah.
And how you choose those voices and what you choose to make them mean.
Right.
And if you want to listen to them or not, because just because somebody is close to you doesn't mean that they have to be close to you. You know, we have choices in how we interact with people in the physical world and in our inner world.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah, I like that. You get to choose the voices that you hear, or I think what you're really saying is you get to choose the message that you want to hear, as opposed to the voice itself. The voice is irrelevant.
Right. I mean,
it's the message that really matters.
Exactly.
Yeah. And what I have learned for myself, and I don't know how you think about this, but every time I tried to fight these voices or fight the dragons, as it were, I end up losing. I end up losing every single time, because the voice always finds a way to, disappear for a while and turn around and come right back. It finds another entrance into my awareness. What I have learned is that the only real way to quiet these voices, to tame the dragons, for me, is to pay attention to them and to befriend them and to listen to what they have to say without accepting it necessarily as gospel truth, but simply hearing it and then going a little deeper and saying, well, so where's that belief coming from? What is the meaning underneath it? What are you really trying to do for me? And so forth. And when I do that, I discover that every one of these voices is doing something to try to protect me from some perceived danger somewhere. It might be real, it might not be real. And that's the whole point right there, is I get to decide if it's a real danger, then I can deal with it. If it's not a real danger, I can say, well, thank you so much for that. I appreciate your paying attention to, potential dangers for me. I got it. I can handle this now. Does that work? Yeah. Is that the sort of thing that you talk about?
Definitely, because as people are able to shift how they think about things, change their perspective on life, they're able to interact in the world differently. I mean, I was working with somebody the other day who always was thinking other people were judging her and being very judgmental about herself. Mm. And after we had done some work together, the next week we talked and she's like, it's amazing how those thoughts will come into my head and I'll just stop them because I don't need to listen to that. I don't need to have that negative energy. And it's not that you completely prevent them from ever happening in your head, but how you interact with them, how you address them, what you do with them can shift and change, because it's like, it's not important, or they're not relevant, or it's not saying something that I need to hear right now, or I don't need to believe that in my life right now.
Right.
And I think that's kind of what you're talking about as well.
Right. Yeah. The idea that I don't have to listen to that message right now. There are other messages that I could listen to instead. But I think it's important to understand. There's a lot of people out there who talk about the power of positive thinking and all this kind of stuff. And I think, sure, positive thinking is wonderful. Any kind of positivity is wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't just buy yourself a little positivity blanket and put it on top of everything.
No,
It doesn't work that way.
Because everything is still underneath there
Exactly.
and it's just bubbling up.
Yeah, that's the problem that I see in a lot of the different kinds of trainings that are out there, is that they don't really address the issue. It's like putting a Band-Aid on.
Right.
You know, sure, the Band-Aid will protect whatever the symptoms are, but they won't take care of anything that's causing the symptoms in the first place.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it's to go the medical route, since you mentioned Band-Aid, I mean, it's the preventative as opposed to fix the problem after it occurs.
Right.
Start with where the root of it is.
Root. Perfect.
Get rid of it.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that's the whole point, isn't it? It's root cause analysis. And I don't like to use the word analysis, because that implies putting the brain into action and thinking about stuff.
Mm-hmm.
What you have to do instead is you have to go inside. You have to get into the muck that's internal. All the pain that you've been trying to avoid, you have to go back to those places. You have to go back to the old wounds that existed. You have to address them directly and go and look at them. And sometimes it means you're kind of, in a sense, reliving the pain, but it's not exactly the same pain, because now you're experiencing the pain now when the event happened many, many years before. So the pain now is a different kind of pain, but it gets you to that place where you can recognize, oh yeah, I shut down this and this and this and this because of this pain. Mm-hmm. Well, okay, I'm not happy about the pain that I had, but I really want to reclaim this over here and this over here and these other things that went away when I, tried to avoid this pain.
Right.
So sometimes you have to go through the pain in order to get to the gifts that you really want in your life.
Right. And sometimes, yes, you have to go back and sit in the pain, but I don't always believe that you have to sit in it. You may have to revisit
I'm not talking about sitting in it. I'm just saying you may have to go through it.
But to go back to get whatever lessons there may be from it and get a different perspective on it, because sometimes things happen in our life, like you were mentioning in your childhood. Everyone has something that happened in their childhood. And whatever it may be, to see from your eyes now as an adult what you could have gotten from that. And it's like, oh, well, maybe this was really the situation, but I didn't perceive it that way as a 2-year-old.
Sure.
And understanding what it really means in your life today. And maybe you got compassion from it. Maybe you got a sense of resilience. Maybe, who knows? Everyone gets something different from it. And understanding those gifts helps you live now in a more meaningful way. And so going back to revisit, but getting the lessons and the learnings is very important.
Yeah. Well, it's been my experience that I have tried in the past to push stuff down that I didn't want to feel, that I didn't want to experience, because I had this idea in my head that it was going to be very painful, that it was going to maybe cause pain for other people, that whatever the story is that I was telling myself, I would push it down. Now, the interesting thing is that stuff that I was pushing down kept wanting to find its way out. And it didn't stop wanting to find its way out just because I was trying to be a man of self-control. Mm-hmm. It still wanted to find its way out. And it did indeed find its way out by leaking sideways. And when it leaked out sideways, that's when it did the most damage. When I was actually able to simply create a space for myself that was safe, and I have the protection of loving people around me, then I was able to open that up and allow it to just come out. It didn't pose anywhere near as much danger or damage as I had worried about. But what it did do was it gave me that freedom to just release. And that was what allowed me to reconnect to my joy, reconnect to my unconditional love and everything else that's so important to me. And so it's kind of one of those things that the ego mind says, no, 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 as it's constantly in resistance, constantly says, yeah, get me out of here. And that's where the dragons really come alive, I think.
Yeah.
Don't you dare do that. Stay away from that fiery cauldron over there. And that's what happened. But the truth is, the fiery cauldron isn't nearly as fiery or as cauldrony as we think it is. And that's the important thing for us to realize. And the only way to really understand that is to experience it. I mean, I can tell it to you intellectually, and you might trust me up to a point, but you know what your body is saying. You know what your mind is saying. And that's what you're listening to.
Right. And at some point, I mean, what you were just describing, I don't think I know anyone who has not stuffed emotions at some point. And, we all do it because we're not ready to deal with it at whatever point. And we have to be at a place where, like you said, it's safe to be able to address those emotions. And it happens. And, I like to talk about in grief is patient. It'll wait. And if you don't address it and you don't deal with it and you just stuff it, when you are ready to deal with it, it'll come back just like it would have at the beginning if you had addressed it at the beginning.
Right.
So and you're able to deal with it at a better level if you're actually at a place where you're wanting to deal with it. Because quite frankly, sometimes people, especially with grief, and many people don't have the capacity to do anything other than grieve if in that first month or that first moment, because it's such a shock to the system. Life has upended itself, and you can't function if you're up and dressed, that's a win in early grief. And everybody has to go through it. You can get help, but really you got to go through it yourself. And then when you're at a point and it's different, and you're like, I'm sick of this. I want something different in my life. What can I do differently? Then you can start looking at more deeper meanings and what really is happening.
Right.
And everyone's timing is different on that. And everyone's need for support is different, because, I can't tell you what to do. I mean, I can't live your grief for you. And I know that I've experienced the death of a child, and I know many people who have. And that is something I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Yet, if I've been asked, would I change anything in my life? I wouldn't change it. And I know that sounds crazy because, well, how could you say you wouldn't want your daughter back? I said, I didn't say I don't want my daughter back, but the fact that she died is not something, I mean, I wouldn't be the person I am today if she were still alive.
Right. That's a real interesting perspective. The thing is, I have a hard enough time understanding my own journey in life, let alone trying to imagine what someone else's journey is. It's not for me to decide. For example, your daughter's journey may have been exactly that, with that in mind, to help you experience more joy. and to be able
Right.
to help people. That might have been her part of the journey that you took together.
Right.
I think that we all make some kind of spiritual contract with each other long before we meet each other in person on this physical planet, you know? And at the time that we come together, if in whatever way we do, whether it's in a joyful way or a harmful way or a destructive way, whatever it is, it still is there to serve some kind of a purpose, to help us have some kind of an experience, which then enriches our lives in some way so that we can share that experience with other people. And maybe not just other people, but other beings, whoever they might be.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's a beautiful thing you just said, and yeah, I totally resonate with that. I've often thought, if one of my children did die, what would happen? You know, well, at this point in my life, they're all adults now, so it would be very different for me than if they had died, you know, at the age of 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But it would still be a painful experience, knowing that these are people that came into the world partly because of something I did,
Mm-hmm.
even though it was a very small part. But I did raise them. I did have, you know, an impact on their lives. I did help get them up to a certain point before they went off and lived their own lives. So there's been this really, really strong bond between us. And so to have them go away, that could be that would be painful, and I certainly miss them.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm not saying that you wouldn't miss them, and I'm not saying it wouldn't be painful, and I would, you know, it's not a journey that let's see, how can I say this? I wouldn't recommend it as a growth journey. However, if it is something that happens in somebody's life, how to look at it.
Right.
You know, in some of the groups that I lead where there are a lot of bereaved parents, I try to be that hope for people that you can actually have happiness again. You can actually have joy.
Yeah.
It's not, you know, I remember first attending some groups, and some people just for decades seemed to be stuck in the same place. And I knew I didn't want that for myself. And even though now I'm not, you know, I volunteer with grief groups, but that isn't the work that I do right now. I mean, yes, some of my clients are going through grief, but my primary focus is helping people once they're at that place where it's like, what's next? You know, how can I be a better me? How can I make the difference in the world, you know, that I'm meant to do, and do it now instead of 10 years from now?
Yeah.
And to really shift that dynamic in life and know that it's possible to do, even no matter what has happened. Because we don't know what has happened in people's lives. I mean, some people have gone through horrendous tragedies and circumstances, either in childhood or adult life. And the fact that all of us walk around seeming to be normal is quite astonishing sometimes when we think about what's going on. And so as you identify these pieces that you're not wanting to keep in your life, and knowing what to do to diffuse them, to tame them, to slay them, whatever terminology you want to say.
Right.
But
well, you know, it's interesting you talked about some people being caught in this cycle of grief for a long period of time. And here's what just came up for me as I was thinking about that. It would be easy for me to let my judging Jenny come up and say, oh, I got through that so fast. That person is clearly struggling, is clearly broken. It would be easy to fall into that judgment. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, the reason I'm even saying that is because secretly, I might never actually admit to having that judgment, but I know that sometimes it comes up in my head. And when it does come up, I have to remind myself, I do not know that person's journey. Just because I went through a similar experience at, it took me this long, and that person's going through this experience that's taking this long, it says nothing about who we are.
Right.
Each of us has our own reason, whatever it might be, for going through the experience at the rate that we go through it.
Exactly.
And that's all part of it. So, the other thing is, I talked about having this spiritual contract with one another before we even manifest on the physical world. Now, just to put it into context, if we talk about you and your daughter here, I really doubt if you and your daughter had this spiritual contract that said, yeah, I'm going to go first, I'll be your mom, then you'll come down, and then you'll die at 3 years old. None of that would have been happening in your spiritual contract. Your spiritual contract would have been more like you saying to this spiritual being, this time when I go through my experience, I want to have the experience of loss of joy so that I can reconnect with it and teach other people how to stay connected to it. Maybe that was the purpose of your journey. And then the person or the spirit holding the energy of your daughter said, oh yeah, I think I got a way we can make that happen, and doesn't tell you. You don't know. You see, this is the beauty of these spiritual contracts. Besides which, even after we go through the transition from spirituality into physicality, we forget the whole thing anyway.
Exactly.
And so part of our journey is to remember what it was we agreed to. That's what's fun about this. That's what makes life so bloody amazing.
And we keep getting these insights as we get older and have more experiences in our life and figure out, well, why did that happen? Well, maybe it's because of this, that, and the other. And, you can piece it all together. Some of that
might just be our egos trying to put in on things too. So, but I absolutely believe that we made some kind of a spiritual contract, and we didn't delineate every single detail of the contract. We just simply said, I want to have this kind of experience in my life. Now, in my case, I believe it was, I want to experience the importance of knowing who I really am.
Mm.
And so the way mine went was my mother at 3 years old told me, I know you better than you know yourself. So the first thing I'm doing at 3 years old is saying, oh, well, you know me better than I know myself, so therefore I am going to defer to everybody. I don't know who I am. I am going to allow other people to tell me who I am. Now, I had no clue I was doing this, right? But as I started, by the time I got into my 40s and the anger level and the resentment was just getting so big that I just had to get out of there, eventually I was able to go back in time and say, oh, that's the thing that started the whole thing. Because today, I realize that the most important thing to me is knowing who I really am. And I believe it's the most important thing for each of us to know.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what my teaching is all about.
Yeah.
It's about knowing who you really are. Nothing else matters until you get to that piece of truth. Everything else comes from that. And this is what I tell people. I said, the only real truth in the world is this. I am. Period. End of sentence. There's no other absolute truth. Everything else emanates from that. If you think about even religious statements, what's the other name of God? I am that I am, right? And that's the only true statement. So everything else is a perception beyond that. Oh God, I'm sorry. I'm kind of raving here. But anyway, I wanted to get back to this whole thing about joy, because this is the thing that attracts you. This is the thing that you want to bring more of into the world. And so I'd like to know from your perspective, why is joy so important?
Joy is so important because having not had it for over a decade and realizing that it's the secret, it's that missing component, because when we have it, we love it. But when it's not there, we sometimes don't even realize that it's missing. And nothing really seems to work. Life and business and relationships. I mean, just, it's like, doesn't quite work in the same way. And that secret resource that we all have within us, but we've either forgotten about or had these joy-stealing dragons come into our lives that take over and hide it. Once I reconnect to that, we can make amazing choices in our life, and we can take the actions that we're meant to take in this world and really improve everything in our lives, improve our relationships, improve our health, improve our businesses. It is the key. And I saw that in my daughter because she had that twinkle in her eye, and everything, I mean, even though she would have to be in the hospital on a regular basis, even though she had medical equipment, she had nurses, there was always that spark of joy. She was always happy. I mean, okay, when she couldn't breathe, she wasn't happy, but nobody's happy when you can't breathe. But that element of just like excitement about life, exploring and being connected to people that we sometimes lose sight of. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm so passionate about joy. And I know, like, Jessica's no longer here on this earth to share it directly. And so I know that that's my mission. I mean, right. That is what is important to me, is to continue to share it and let other people know that no matter what, they can still have their joy.
Right. You know, that's interesting. As you were talking, I'm thinking to myself, joy seems to me to be just our natural state. It's the state that we're born into. It's the state that we really blossom from. And so when we do things to disconnect from our joy, we're in a very strange way harming ourselves, punishing ourselves, torturing ourselves, because we're denying ourselves the essence of who we really are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's very well said.
Well, thank you. But I was just wondering how that resonates for you.
No, I agree, because as a kid, I mean, most babies are happy. Mm-hmm. I mean, unless there's some physical challenge, with them, they're happy. They laugh. They're silly. Kids, I mean, if you've ever been a child or been around a child, they laugh. And as adults, somehow around puberty, we got that judging Jenny, oh, I can't laugh. I'm not supposed to do that. That just, I shouldn't allow myself to show my joy, because what will people think? I'm going to be judged for it, all of that nonsense. And we don't actually enjoy life. We don't actually laugh. And that is another piece that I love, is just getting people to laugh for no reason. And having that just be truly joyful is so much fun. And I'm not sure if the connection is still here. So are we
Hello?
still connected? Are we still connected?
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. I lost complete video. Now there's 2 instances of me on the screen, and I don't dare get rid of one of them. Oh, now it's gone.
Well,
I don't know what happened there, Linda. I'm so sorry. I dropped off.
That's okay.
But I came back.
You're back.
Here we are.
I'm joyful that you're back.
Yeah, you got to love technology, and I'm glad that you were able to stay on.
And so what I was talking about is laughter. I mean, as kids, we laugh. As adults, we think everybody's judging us. And so things happen. Technology goes haywire. We can laugh about it. Just be silly. And it's okay, because in the grand scheme of things, it all works out.
Right. Or as some might say, it just doesn't matter.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, it really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes me think of the Zen koan that says, how does it go? Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. You know, it's amazing to me that really the only thing that differs between one instance and the other is my level of awareness, right? And ultimately, that's all that matters, is that all of us increase our level of awareness and become more connected to the truth of who we really are, and therefore connect to our joy.
Yeah. Yeah, because if we can connect to our joy, we connect better to other people, we connect to our purpose, we know who we are,
right,
and can do more in the world.
Right. All right. So we may never actually eliminate these dragons completely from our lives, but I think there are ways in which we can get them under more control. Do you have some suggestions for how people can do that?
Well, the first one I like to say is, which actually works for all of the dragons, is to take action. And it sounds so simple, but frequently these dragons are preventing us from taking action, or preventing us from taking the right action. And there are 5 different types of action that we can be taking, and each one is something that helps us move in the direction that we want to be moving. And I know we don't have time to go through all of those right now, but if you go ahead, I mean, I know you mentioned at the beginning, I have a quiz. If you're curious which dragon is most relevant in your life and want some tips of what to do, there are tips available at the end of the quiz. And that's at joystealingdragons.com. But yeah, it's take the action that you want to be taking and get out of your own way.
joystealingdragons.com, all one word except for the dot.
Yes.
Yeah. And so you've got that quiz is on the website. People can take the quiz, and there's some tips, as you say, for what actions they can take
Exactly.
in order to help minimize the effect of that dragon. Well, awesome. Linda, this has been just so amazing. I just always enjoy our conversations. Thank you so much for being with me today, and thank you for sharing your wisdom around this whole concept of joy and how to deal with those joy-stealing dragons. I really appreciate your wisdom and your presence.
Well, thank you. It was a lot of fun. It's always great to have a conversation with you, and talking about joy is joyful.
Yeah. It is. And of course, I want to thank you all for watching today's episode of Life Mastery TV. And I'd like to remind you that you can view my recordings right on my website at lifemasterytv.com. That's life-mastery-tv.com. Meanwhile, I'd like you to remember the Life Mastery mantra. Let it carry you through your whole week. It goes like this. I gratefully forgive the imperfect being I have been in the past. I gratefully accept the magnificent being I am right now. I gratefully welcome the evolved being I am becoming in each new moment. Until we meet again, my name is David McLeod. I am your Life Mastery Coach. Thank you for being here, and I'm wishing you light, love, and blessings on your continuing journey. Bye-bye for now.
Bye.